Hello there, and welcome to the Rambling to Myself podcast. I'm your host, Aaron, and today we are in the music corner, and I'll be ranking and reviewing all of Weezer's discography in anticipation of the upcoming Black album. In order of release date, the list of albums I'll be covering include the Blue Album, Pinkerton, Green Album, Maladroit, Make Believe, the Red Album, Raditude, Hurley, Everything Will Be Alright in the End, the White Album, and Pacific Daydreams. And at the end of my ranking series and the Black Album review, which will be coming in March, I will be covering Death to False Metal and the Teal Album, as I do intend to add them to my ranking list. As for the format of the videos, I intend to cover each album track by track with a finalized opinion/review at the conclusion of every album, along with any additional thoughts as to why I think the album is where it's at for my ranking. Pretty much all extra tracks, deluxe edition tracks, B-sides will be omitted from the album reviews, but maybe added here and there if I find them worth mentioning or if they come up as a result of any Spotify mishaps. I will also be putting a ranking system comprised of S-rank, A-rank, and least favorite tracks on each album. S-rank will be limited to my top 3 picks, A-rank being the better tracks on the album, and least favorite being skippable tracks or tracks I just didn't enjoy as much on the album. Any in the middle tracks won't be given any rankings at all. Also, at the conclusion of every video, I intend to put up the list of all the S-rank, A-rank, least favorite tracks, as well as a single word review at the end of every album to try to wrap things up. These one word reviews will just be kinda on screen. I'll go into depth into them if I find it to be necessary, but most of the time I'm just gonna put it on screen, and that'll be the end of that. As for my own experience on Weezer, I've been listening to Weezer for about, I would say, half a year now, and I've listened to each album at least 5 times within a large span of time in between in order to be able to give a fair review and amount of time for certain elements to age well enough for me to be able to talk about or understand things that I may have missed on earlier listenings, because I'm a Radiohead fan and I believe in the power of allowing tracks to click as per the subreddit dictates. A quick disclaimer before we start: these are mostly ranked based on my personal preference above anything. My ranking is nothing more than my own opinions and enjoyment of the albums. Feel free to comment down below if you have any differing opinions and thoughts, as I do enjoy reading different opinions and insights on certain tracks and elements of albums that may have escaped me, or it may offer me a different view on certain matters that I may find a bit more boring or I may not enjoy as much on the album. Without further ado, let's begin. First on my list, and unfortunately its last place, is Pacific Daydream, Mexican Fender. First track on the album and probably my favorite, and in my opinion the best Weezer song and song on the album for me, with the embers of the rock heavy White Album dying out into this transition into the pure pop inspired Pacific Daydream, is Mexican Fender. The song starts off with this very gnarly, powerful guitar with the sleigh bells that will eventually overtake most of the tracks on the album. Then the song transitions into this very pretty tinderbox guitar tone that I think sounds really sweet. Unlike everything that follows, this song is just a pure bop and hit banger, especially that bridge where the drums just come crashing down into this final chorus where all the elements introduced throughout the song come together in an epic finale. The general energy and rock elements that run throughout this track completely take a back seat as the album goes on, which is a damn shame, because in my opinion, if there was a bit more of some of that energy and rock element more present to help fill up the space and not allow River's vocals to shine so much because they're really badly produced, I think the album could have been a pretty nice experience. It's a piece of crap. I'm not a fan of this song at all. I feel like River's vocals have way too much compression, gain, or some weird vocoder effects, to the point where it's really distracting for my enjoyment of the song. Also, it's veering hard into some sort of pop rock I'd hear on the radio and just automatically change the channel or want to skip the track over if I could. The song just feels overproduced to unenjoyable levels to me. The chorus is pretty alright though, but sitting through the rest of the song is a pretty horrible experience in my opinion. The only way I can enjoy this song is if I literally zone out everything, just listen to the bass and drums, because they are definitely the focal points of the song, which is probably why I nearly skipped this track on my third listen at the bridge, because the bass took a backseat, along with the fact that the bass lines are the only thing I care about at all on the rest of the album. The random guitar cutouts are also somewhat jarring if you take the time to zone in and enjoy them, because honestly you can't.
How cool is that?
Feels like summer. And now for my second entry of the S ranks is Feels Like Summer. I actually really enjoy this song, which may come as a surprise because of how much I hate pop music, and as I will talk about much more later down the line. I suppose the trend of production on this album is to be overproduced, so that's a real shame because it brings the song down. I feel as though giving this song a lot more room to breathe, like in the White Album, would have made this a really good track for me. Also, I'm a huge sucker for the subwoofers basses, so that might be a side reason for me. Happy Hour. It's alright, that's all I have to say. The compressed vocals make a loud, jarring return, since the song is pretty spacious and the instrumentation is pretty calm and quiet. So River's overproduced vocals just sticks out and shines out in a really bad way, since everything else is so quiet. Weekend Woman. In all honesty, the bridge is all I can remember from this song after several listens. I do wish the acoustic guitars were a bit louder, because at times it feels as though they're barely there, or when I was listening to them on my speakers. The song is okay, it's just okay. QB Blitz. I feel as though this song is a bit of an inferior version of Girl We Got a Good Thing from the White Album. It's a somewhat Christmassy song with soft guitar underlying throughout the track. Similar to Happy Hour, after the drums kick in, the vocal filters does as well, and the overproduced vocals on top of the soft instrumentation is just... I can see this being played in the background of some shopping mall during Christmas, but I don't really enjoy this song as much, aside from the acoustic guitar riff, which is pretty nice, and the song's bridge, which is pretty cool, with the sweeping phases which end to go back to this boring pop chorus. So for the next 4 tracks, I'll be honest, I kind of fell asleep and got really bored on my later listenings, and I was tunnel visioning way too much on the bass and drums to be able to give proper judgment and the general soundscape. So I'll just power through them, because most of my reviews will end up being huge paragraphs on why I think they're just generic pop songs, and I don't want to bore you guys with that. So here we go, my positives. Sweet Mary, I thought it was a boring stereo pop song. Tries to be a bit more upbeat sounding, but fails because River sounds like he's about to fall asleep. Skip this track pretty much on my later listenings because I really couldn't stand it. Get Right. It has more energy than the last track, nice guitar layers here and there, but completely ruined with a generic pop chorus. Rivers doesn't get it right, as it's still boring. La Mancha Screwjob tries to be Feels Like Summer with the starting speaking riffs, but fails to follow up. I think Churches does a better job on Mother We Share, but that's not really a good example, because they are completely synth pop and Weezer is, Anyways, the guitar solo is the only thing cool, and it sounds like Rivers is at least trying to sing the song on the second verse, which I liked. And the last song, Any Friend of Diane's, feel like it was generic pop again. Could have sworn I heard the same guitar riff in La Mancha. Also, Rivers sounds like he just copy-pasted himself singing Any Friend of Diane's is a Friend of Mine throughout the whole song. Cool guitar work overall, I suppose. Best part is knowing that this is the last song and watching the timer go down on Spotify. So yeah, that concludes my very short review of the tracks on Pacific Daydream, because in all honesty I don't really have much to talk about because I didn't really enjoy this album personally. From an objective viewpoint, this album doesn't really have anything wrong with it, as it's pretty consistently average throughout in my opinion. It's just that from a personal point of view and preference, I'm a person who doesn't really care much for pop music, and as such, on the basis of the question of why should I listen to this album instead of something else, I really can't see myself rating this album any higher. Like, I can totally understand why someone would really enjoy or rate this highly. There's some really catchy bass lines, some really cool layering here and there, and I think it's pretty well made. However, on a negative note, maybe a bit overproduced for that pop points to some extent. And the album does have really nice ideas here and there, but I just don't think it's executed well enough or presented in a way that appeals to me. The only good thing to me throughout the album are definitely the bass lines and some acoustic guitar works here and there. And I don't think that alone makes up for the squeaky clean pop polish, somewhat grating vocal filters, and the overuse of wind chimes or sleigh bells throughout the album for whatever reason. It's also quite clear that Rivers' vocals have taken a backseat from his more expressive styles in White or Everything Will Be Alright in the End, along with this huge, annoyingly overused vocal filter in every track that just makes his voice stand out, since the instruments used and the background sounds of the song are inherently soft. I also find it very difficult at times to not just skip over songs, which is a pretty bad sign when you want to listen to a full album front to back. I find the album in general to be very bland and boring, most of the content on the album, and as such, I would not really want to come back to revisit it, and would be hard pressed to find a reason not to just skip through it. There's nothing inherently wrong with the ideas or the presentation of the album. It's just that on a personal note, I find it extremely boring and far too poppy for my taste. I have tried to give this album a go and I've given it more plays than most people would bother with, but I can't really find myself enjoying this album simply because of how much of a sterile pop album it is. Like I've mentioned several times throughout, the only way I would really enjoy this album is if I just completely zone out on the drums and bass, because they're actually really well made and I really did enjoy them. In fact, I find it difficult at times not to just straight up do that on later listening sessions, as everything else just zones out and it's just so painfully boring to me. But if that's the case, what's the point of having the rest of the band be there instead of just being a Scott and Pat show if I can't really enjoy anything else the album has to offer? Because the only way to do so would be to pretend that the rest of the band doesn't exist. So my final thoughts will be in regards to why I think it's worse than Raditude personally, because everyone knows why Raditude is at the bottom of most Weezer fans' list. In regards to both albums, I actually couldn't really decide which was worse initially. It was a simple draw between the two arguments. Of one hand, Raditude being much worse with really low lows that made me physically cringe and want to implode, but the introduction and the end of the album and some elements here and there was pretty acceptable and somewhat more pleasing to sit through than Pacific Daydreams on a purely personal basis. And on the other hand, we have Pacific Daydreams, which was a personal snooze fest of an album experience, which really did nothing for me. Although, as an album itself, I feel it didn't do anything inherently wrong, as its lows lie more on the production and repetition of ideas and instrumentation throughout, rather than songs being subjectively bad, because in all honesty, they're not. To me, the argument boiled down to which do I find personally more appalling and irredeemable. Raditude being much worse and having some decent to average tracks that I may revisit here and there, or Pacific Daydream being so pop and sterile that I would never think twice to touch anything past Feels Like Summer ever again. And I think my final verdict, as you guys already know since it's on the screen, will be Pacific Daydreams because of pure personal preferences. If someone were to invite me to a Weezer listening sessions of the two album, I'd be far more inclined to listen to the whole of Raditude, at the risk of dying on certain tracks, which I would definitely be going very in depth on when I review it just a few minutes later into the podcast. And in comparison to falling asleep halfway through the whole of Pacific Daydreams, and like I've said many times, this is completely up to personal preference. Subjectively speaking, personal opinions aside, I do think Pacific Daydreams is a far better musical album by a far long shot, and to some extent, I would even say are better than some of the albums that I'll mention in later parts of the video segment and rankings. But on a pure personal basis, as someone who's not a fan of pop music, I really can't stand it. In a sense, Pacific Daydream is already fighting an uphill battle, and I'm less forgiving to it since I'm expecting more of Mexican Fender and Feels Like Summer, and less of better versions of Beach Boys, which are a lot. It's just that I find it far more exciting to sit through a genre I grew up with, along with a few nice new rose-tinted glasses, than go for the pop equivalent found in Pacific Daydreams. But saying it's far more exciting is not really saying much, because the bar is as low as it can get without touching the floor and going 6 feet under. The other biggest point to me is also the fact that I have to constantly tell myself that I don't really want to go through anything past Feels Like Summer, which never really hit me in Raditude, aside from some tracks that I will mention soon enough in the review. And even if I do have to power through Raditude with enormous willpower, I simply can't find the same strength for Pacific Daydreams, which is ultimately why I rate it below Raditude, because I wasn't constantly hoping for the album to end. But I mean, this is pretty much the bottom of the barrel, and I never really intend to revisit these albums front to back in my own free time after giving them more than enough listens through different occasions. And mind you, I didn't listen to them 5 times in the span of a week. I gave them 3 months of time to grow on me, and I do admit, like I said, I do have many tracks that I do enjoy in Gratitude and Pacific Daydreams. But as a full album experience, I find it hard to really do that. So it really doesn't really matter where I put these two on my list because they're both technically the worst of the Weezer catalog in my opinion and personal preference. So yeah. Now we are on the second worst Weezer album in my opinion. And I will be putting a new system for this. Just for this very album because everyone, including my friends, love to shit on the lyrics. So for every song I cover, on the screen, I will put my favorite line. Besides that, I definitely put way too much effort into the art. Also, big shout out to Google Images for the nice sofa. Without further ado, Gratitude. If you're wondering if I want you to, I want you to. So, first track on the album, and similar to Pacific Daydream, probably my favorite and in my opinion the best song on the album, also because it's their most popular hit, I suppose. Maybe that's why it's so good, for whatever reason. I think that if this song was on another album like Hurley or Red, it could have been a perfectly fine song placed on an actually good album. So it's kind of a waste of a really good track in my opinion. Harmonies with this megaphone effect is a bit too blandly pop punk and to some extent has too much filter on it. And unfortunately, it's only downhill from here. I'm your daddy. Just looking at the title of this, the name of this song. The mixing for one drops in the song. The lead guitar sound horrible. It's akin to a cover band trying to emulate a good Weezer tone using a Line 6 Spider amp. This is even further shown in the chorus where it just explodes with this horrible, almost claustrophobically mastered rhythm guitars taking up the space of the whole song. I mean, at least that's cowbells in the second verse. It's not too bad of a track aside from the abhorrent lyrics, which I'll address later in the album overview as the whole album has very atrocious lyricism in overall. It could probably be a real classic bop if it had somewhat better lyrics and production, but the combination of the worsening in quality and sound that takes this really sharp turn from the first track, it just kicks this song down to a mere meh for me. I also really detest the 2000 pop synth that comes in randomly before the last chorus that just sends me into this sixth dimension of cringe. It's not to say it's subjectively horrible because in comparison the rest of the song is horseshit because the synth is really well made and it's probably the best produced part of the song. It's just that it's so blatantly uncreative, tossed in there for the sake of having a 2000 pop synth that just makes it fall short of what it could have been. The Girl Got Hot. Next we have The Girl Got Hot. It's at this point I'd like to, go back to my teenager phase and start wearing all black clothing and pack up for another Simple Plan concert since they do a far better job of making songs like these anyways. Although their production in no pads, no helmets and just balls is pretty horrible now that I listen to them. But hey, at least they got heart. The guitar does sound significantly better than I'm Your Daddy. And also, if you want some mindless pop punk, then this track is not the worst thing in the world. If anything, it's just really awfully bland and uncreative, and it's just, your run-of-the-mill pop punk track. It's a piece of crap. This song. This fucking song. This song is the very reason why I feel this album is bad. It just highlights the 2000s pop mixture with Weezer's usual rock sounds. And in all honesty, this sounds like a fucking Tayo Cruz song that features Weezy, Cuomo, and Lil Wayne, and it sounds like something I'd hear in a cheap pirated CD shop back when I was in high school, and the stuff you change the radio channel from. I literally got an out-of-body experience on my first listening of this song when Lil Wayne started rapping from the sheer amount of cringe I experienced. It's such a shame too, because I feel like this song has so many potentials in it, from the live acoustic versions and the demo acoustic versions, which are really good in my opinion, but we get this pop remix garbage. I listened to this song twice because I couldn't really sit through the whole thing seriously without dying of cringe after the phenomena that is Rivers rapping. I feel as though the only way to truly enjoy this song would be to take it ironically to the highest degree, as any attempts I try to listen to this song seriously, I always end up failing. But if I scream the chorus, then the song magically becomes acceptable. Or if I'm just like mocking my friends on, hey, you guys want to hear the best Weezer song, then honestly, this song is pretty enjoyable because it's a really good pop song. That's it. It's just not a good Weezer song is the problem. Like, I definitely get the appeal because growing up through the 2000s, I'm naturally exposed to this kind of tracks on the radio. But the problem is, I'm not expecting this low quality of music from Weezer, and that's where my gripe is. Like, I can completely enjoy this song on a like fun basis when I'm just mindlessly at a club or something, but if I'm like sitting at home saying like, hey, I want to listen to Weezer, I'm not gonna play this fucking song. So that's where my main negativity comes from. Like, I get where this song's going from, what this song is going for, but I just don't like it. That's it. Yeah. Put me back together. Put me back together. The reason I picked the bridge as the main lyrics is because I felt as though Rivers was putting lyrics to rhyme for the sake of rhyming above anything else. The second verse was definitely a strong contender for my first choice of very bad lyrics. As for the song itself, I feel like there's a good pickup from the last song. The shitty 2000s bass and touches of synth really doesn't help with the PTSD, but hey, at least it ain't Can't Stop Partying. Maybe the only reason I find this song is good is because it came after such shitfest, and in comparison, anything remotely Weezer and pop punk is just miles better. On the contrary, on later listenings, this song isn't too bad because I come in expecting typical alt rock and pop punk music, which is what it is, I guess. And yeah, I do find it a pretty unoffensive track. That's all I can say. It's a piece Tripping of down crap. The freeway. Meh. Another bland pop punk track that Simple Plan or Bowling for Soup could have put out better. But yeah, I have nothing much to say about this song aside good job Rivers Cuomo on imitating the run-of-the-mill pop punk sound, I suppose. Even on later listenings, I only found this song to be decent, if anything. Gratitude is cancer. First things first, before I go into the song, I would like to thank user Goofy Geef for putting my favorite line, which you guys have already seen, and pretty much surmises my thoughts on this song. I don't even know where to begin with this fucking song. Like, I have so much to say because hands down, this is the worst Weezer song. Period. Just why? Why? I fucking hate this track. I literally detest this track. It's just an ugly auto-tune blend on a Hindu singer's track that doesn't really do much except add a layer of background sound or composition for the song to just exist upon. Like, it's not so much of a point on how much Weezer shouldn't experiment, but it's more of how they shouldn't go about experimenting. In comparison, let's take Muse's new track on Simulation Theory, Break It To Me, or any Resistant track for that matter. That's a perfect blend because Matt Bellamy actually takes the composition of other forms of music and bends it to fit perfectly in context of the song, and along with the very Egyptian-esque riffs he creates to help that. The problem with this song is the fact that Weezer doesn't do that. They go the complete wrong direction in creating this track, and it's that they're trying too hard to adapt the sound of Weezer into a Hindu setting or another genre rather than doing the opposite like Sugar Ray did, which in my opinion is a far better rendition, although other people may beg to differ. I think a lack of research and external input might have led to this disaster of a track, as they clearly didn't know what they were doing, tossing a random meditation track in the midst of a rock album. It's like throwing a pure Beethoven piano piece with children singing about Thanksgiving into a fucking death metal album about gore and violence with no heads up or overarching themes leading into it. It just doesn't fucking work. I'm sure there's ways to do it, but Weezer didn't fucking do it here. It's just such a bad way of going about experimentation that there's honestly no redeeming quality to this song. The only situation I can see this song being fucking played is if people didn't know Weezer and have no real concept of music and just want something to listen to while meditating in yoga class with a bunch of other people where you can't hear this trash as it's drowned out by the sound of your yoga instructor telling you what to do. This is honestly the only track I can't stand in the whole Weezer's discography, and Can't Stop Partying is a fucking masterpiece compared to this colossal fuck up. I honestly had to take a break after this track because of how much it just turned me off the album. And honestly, every single time I really tried. I have really tried to listen to this song, but since my 2 listenings of this song, I have always skipped it. And yeah, I just hate this song. I fucking hate this song. Let it all hang out. So, moving on from that disastrous previous track, we have Let It All Hang Out, another generic pop punk track. The introduction with these squealing guitars are horribly loud. They just make you wince from pain because they are really loud. Randomly, just like. At least the chorus is fun in context of the album, but at best, that's really a backhanded compliment, I suppose.
Whoa.
In the mall! In the mall! One of my favorite songs. Unironically. The lyric chosen is the worst lyric because the second worst line is my flair on Reddit, which is something I laughed uncontrollably at on my first listen through with a friend of mine. I unironically enjoy this song. Sure, the guitar tone sounds like shit, and the return of the Line 6 amp with an even shittier cover band trying to make a tone simulating Maladroit is not very nice, but at least there's some level of satire to it, and that's what really separates this track from the others, is the presence of some level of self-awareness, I suppose. And I think if this song had a better mix, could have been my favorite track. It's just stupidly simple and dumb, which makes it have somewhat of an endearing quality to it in comparison to the shitfest of pop punk 2000s pop I've had to endure so far, and very generic and bland pop punk tracks with no really gut punch or honesty to them. At least, I pray it's ironic, because I've seen a lot of comments saying it's unironic, but as it is, I mean, it's kinda like, where's my sex, you know? You can't take this song at face value like the other songs, which is my main problems with the other songs. It's like, it's meant to be serious, but it's not portrayed seriously. So yeah, that's it.
Whoa.
I Don't Want to Let You Go. Final track on the album, I Don't Want to Let You Go. This is a pretty good track, but as with the other tracks, the production is pretty trash. It sounds like The Reason by Hoobastank to some extent, and I guess that's why I find some enjoyment from it as a casual fan of Hoobastank, and a big fan of their record Forever. At best, this feels like a scrapped make-believe track with a poppy facelift, which is really saying something because of how blatantly pop-influenced make-believe sounds at times, which I will cover in another part because I don't want to spoil how far up or down I have ranked that. So yeah. Bonus track. Yes, I completely ripped that off PewDiePie, but bonus track. Like I said earlier, if Spotify added any random tracks that I didn't know was not in the original track list of the album, then I would just put it in. So here we go, Turn Me Round. Because of this being the last track on Spotify, I felt I might as well cover it, because I thought originally it was the final track of the album. Back to the pop punk generic stuff. This song is somewhat a better closer to some extent, because it follows the album sound, although not by that much. At best, it only achieves wrapping up the album, because the whole song is produced horribly. At least it has a bit more energy than the generic trash that we've been given. River sounds a bit tired and pathetic for its vocal delivery. Whether or not this is intentional, I'm not sure. Also, the crash cymbal sounds atrociously mixed. It sticks out like a sore thumb. The production in this track is pretty awful, even for Raditude standards, and this honestly sounds like a B-side Rivers in the Basement song. Sounds rushed and nothing short of awful. It's a shame too, because I think if this ended up on Hurley with a little more time, it could have been a really good song, but for the rush crap it is, I can't really say anything else that's good. Maybe if it was produced better, I'd be inclined to argue for it to be an actual closer, like another track I'll go into on the Green album. In conclusion, I think it's honestly easier for me to list the very few songs I liked, because the rest of the album is it's okay. It's really bland, but at least I find some enjoyment because it's pop punk and that's the genre I grew up with. It's not to say that Raditude is a bad album, which is kind of weird to say. It's just that I expect something of higher quality coming of Weezer. For instance, if this album was made by someone like Bowling for Soup, it could have been easily one of my favorites, or I'd pick out some songs for my playlist rotations, but this sudden departure in quality for Weezer is just a bit too much in my opinion. The only real ways to enjoy this album is to not take it seriously at all, and just enjoy the fuckfest with a blindfold down the water slide. The album, in fact, doesn't really start off terribly at all. I think the album's really palatable for the most part, despite it being far from their best produced and sounding album. But then, Can't Stop Partying comes in, and you're like, hey, I mean, this is probably the worst song, right? And when you think you're bruised and black-eyed enough for the sucker punch, love is the answer. It comes to answer your nightmares and you get knocked out cold. You go brain dead and find it hard to pretty much continue sitting through the whole fucking album. I will admit, or listening to the album with skipping the two worst songs, I have a far more pleasant and actually decent listening on its own, and it does appeal to me because the genre I listen to most is pop punk, and I think if we were to remove Love Is the Answer, because on some listens I can actually bear Can't Stop Partying because I can appreciate it for what it is. Like, that's the thing, as an album I can definitely enjoy it, but the problem is as a Weezer album, there's really nothing on me for this album to enjoy. Like, maybe if you're a fan of 2000s pop like Tiger Cruise and Soulja Boy, or if you're a fan of mindless pop punk like I would be in some circumstances, you find some smidgen of enjoyment out of it like I did, because that was the only positive for me. And you know you've really fucked up if the only positive of an album is that it's listenable. It's not good, it's not atrocious. There's some things to be enjoyed in between here and there, but the album experience front to back can just be boiled down to it being very skippable and very bland. My best advice going in would be for listeners not to expect to listen to Weezer, but a really good Bowling for Soup album, because that's how I sat through my later listenings. Because expecting a Weezer quality album is doing nothing more than setting yourself up for disappointment. And yeah, thanks for watching or listening, I suppose. I'll try to upload the next part within the next 3 to 4 days, so hopefully I can edit fast enough and my computer has the ability to render the parts as quickly as I can edit. And also, a quick side note, all the videos will contain 3 albums from now on. I just had to, because of the number of albums there are, I had to divide them into 3, 3, 3, and 2. And that's about all there is from me this time. I'll see you in the next one. Stay Weezy.